Good morning. Now, today we're going to talk here a little bit about marriage and intimate relationships. Obviously, the last topic was a springboard to get to this one. So, marriage is a form of friendship, of course. It should be, right? Marriage, quite a concept nowadays. A legally and socially sanctioned union of two sexually intimate adults. That it's not right. What traditional things have belonged with marriage? Some kind of economic interdependence. Yeah, clearly, once you get married, your taxes change, right? So there's some kind of interdependence by definition. Often, marriage traditionally involves a common residence, or sexual fidelity, or shared responsibility for children. But these are more traditional roles, and clearly, the very concept of marriage is changing radically. So the kinds of trends, as we probably are aware, that are around marriage nowadays, there's an increased acceptance of remaining single, and it's really strange because, of course, in generations past, if somebody crossed a certain age, then of course the parents would be like, "So when are you going to get married?" Well, that doesn't happen as much anymore. There's much more acceptance of, well, just remain single. Okay, cohabitating without marriage has become much more of an acceptable option. Okay, it's not, it doesn't have the same social stigma anymore. Because I don't know if you remember this, but of course, not that long ago, a child that was born to unwed parents was called a bastard, right? And I mean, we don't really use that term anymore. It's just, it is what it is. Some parents are married, some are not, right? It doesn't really. There's also been a much more reduced emphasis on the permanence of marriage. It's more of a transitional thing. Clearly, there's been a lot of shifts in gender roles that, of course, in more of a traditional marriage, much more mom stays home, mom takes care of the kids, mom cleans the house, dad goes to work, dad's a provider. And clearly, most marriages now, in fact, are two-income families, and roles have shifted dramatically. There's an increase in voluntary childness, and yeah, this is childlessness. This is troublesome. If you look at the in the United States, we have a negative population growth. That if we don't have immigration, we're going to fall into a huge trap that other countries are seeing right now. In particular, the nation we need to look to is Japan. Japan at this point has a negative population rate, which is actually quite large, and Russia also. And so what's happening is in Japan and Russia, the government is implementing programs to encourage childbirth, right? Tax breaks for, etc., etc. Huge social benefits to having children. And what happens is the United States also has this, but we have a fairly healthy rate of what am I trying? Immigration. Okay? And it turns out the rate of immigration that we have is enough to keep our negative population growth in check. However, if we stop the immigration, we're going to be into the same problems that Japan is having right now, where they're just older and older and older, and there's nobody in a younger generation to either pay for or take care of the older people. So we do need to be careful about that. Okay? And clearly, there's a decline in traditional nuclear families. Yeah. So wait, that was this one, right? Yeah, this one. Okay. All right. So here, of course, in the West, we take it for granted that we will select our partners, right? Whether maybe through a dating website or whatever, meet them at the bar or something. But we will make those choices. But about 80% of the world's cultures use arranged marriages. They have parental restrictions, restrictions based on religious classes, social classes, etc. And why? Because check it out right here under my face. People that are in more collectivistic cultures look not just what will this marriage do to me, but what will this marriage do for my family. Okay, so it's a radically different concept. Different words involved with marriage. These are almost anthropology terms, but monogamy, one spouse at a time. Polygamy, having more than one spouse. Okay, endogamy is the tendency to marry within a social group. Now, this would normally be within a tribe or within a clan if you were talking anthropology or something. But endogamy is also, I mean, you tend to marry people that are in the same social class as you, very similar income levels, very similar educational levels, etc. Well, one of the interesting, again, I don't know if I ever mentioned it somewhere, but I actually had an anthropology major in college. I had a double major with psychology. So though I didn't pursue anthropology, it never went away. I still am very interested in anthropology. So here's a pretty cool little splash of anthropology for you. It turns out that cousin marriage is we are again, we're socialized to think, oh, cousins, blah, ooh. Well, you know what, there's nothing wrong with cousin marriage. I mean, take a look. In many cultures, it's forbidden like ours. In fact, it might even be against the law to marry your cousin. I don't know. I'd have to look into it. But anyway, in some cultures, cousin marriage is preferable. If you marry your cousin, what tends to happen is you tend to keep wealth in the family, okay? Because what happens is if a guy has two children, then all of a sudden his estate is split two ways. And if they go off and marry completely other people and they have children, they're split four ways. And it's like, but wait a minute, if you marry your cousins, then all of a sudden they sort of send your estate to each other, and all of a sudden your ancestral lands aren't split or something of this nature. However, there's a huge distinction in some cultures between what equals a cousin. And we don't make this distinction. We have no words in Western culture to describe this. But there's a huge distinction in some cultures between a cross cousin and a parallel cousin. A cross cousin is, okay, get this now, it's cross because it's your mom's brother's children, okay? Mom and brother don't match. A cross cousin would be your dad's sister's children, right? Because dad is male and sister. A parallel cousin is your mom's sister's children or your dad's brother's children. Now, from a genetic perspective, a cross cousin and a parallel cousin have absolutely no difference. They're genetically the same stuff. But in many cultures, marriage to a parallel cousin is considered absolutely forbidden and unheard of, but marriage to a cross cousin is absolutely desirable and expected. So, it's just kind of interesting that our Western perspective are exactly what they are, a Western perspective. So coming back again, because I can't emphasize enough how much this notion of individualistic cultures and collectivistic cultures shape our way of thinking in every way possible. One of my favorite courses that I teach is my cross-cultural anthropology class, and I hope I can teach it again soon. I haven't taught that in a couple of years. I really enjoy that one. And so in individualistic cultures, people are much more, they're looking at the relationship and saying, what am I going to get out of this? And so they look for love before marriage. In more collectivistic cultures, there's much more, what will my family get out of this? And so all of a sudden, marriages tend to be by arrangement, okay? And so all of a sudden, what is relationship satisfaction? So check this out. I love this chart. This is like around the world, how men and women choose their marital partners. Okay, at the very top is the most conservative thing. You see, the most conservative thing possible. Parents choose a partner. Individuals have no ability to object to this selection. Okay, and you find 21% of women and 13% of men experience this situation. What a surprise! There's more women in the conservative perspective. Go down to the very, very bottom, and you get more of the most liberal outcome. You find individual selects a partner all by themselves, and they need no approval. And from the most liberal perspective, about 31% of males have that outcome, whereas only 8% of women get that outcome. So not a shock that around the world, women are being controlled far more than men are. But we can see that there's all kinds of alternatives in between here. Individual selects their own partner, but then the parents or family must approve. Yeah, that's exactly the situation that my marriage was. That is to say, for me, I'm at the very bottom here. I select my own partner, don't care. Now, my wife, she's Asian, so she had a different perspective. So she did in fact choose her own partner. However, what happens is before marriage, we had to get approval from her family. So her mother comes to visit us and decides whether or not I'm good enough to be in the family. So good thing I was carrying that title doctor, because otherwise I don't know if she would have let me in the family. But I'm in. So arranged marriages and love marriages. When you go to India, they have lots of people in arranged marriages, lots of people in love marriages. So let's take a look at a difference between these. We can see the dashed lines are the males and the females in love marriages, people that choose their own in love and etc. And then in the solid lines there is people in arranged marriages. And so they gave these people this test called Rubens love scale. It's a measure of love. And it's pretty clear, at the beginning of the marriage there, that those that are in a, quote, love marriage have more love. Of course they do. Okay? But you see what happens, from 2 years to, from 5 years to 10 years, is those couples in a love marriage, the love crashed. But those in an arranged marriage, they continue to grow. Okay, and the key is pretty good here because number one, passionate love is an important component of marriage, but it's most certainly not enough, right? It's most certainly not enough. It's just a starting point, for example. And so what happens is in these arranged marriages, the couples were not selected randomly. Okay, there was very very specific characteristics, and they were selected so that they would have long-term compatibility. Okay, and so we find that the Western perspective of marriage by love is, although I must tell you that's funny because recently I saw an article about an arranged marriage in India, and it was all set up, and the bride to be was told, "Oh yes, your husband is a successful engineer, etc., etc." They meet for the very first time on the wedding day, and the bride is like, "Wait, wait, wait, what's 4 times 6?" And the guy's like, "Huh?" It's like, "All right, no, this wedding is off. Okay, that isn't gonna happen." All right, so here's a creepy little aspect of marriage. Turns out that our spouses tend to resemble our opposite sex parent. Okay, Sigmund Freud would love this. So, if you're a man, your wife tends to resemble your mother. All right, it's like that's creepy. But if you go back to that attachment theory that we talked about in the last topic, where all social relationships are ultimately based on the attachment that is forms in infancy, I'm not surprised because mom's facial image triggers feelings of comfort. Therefore, other women that have similar characteristics to mom will also trigger feelings of comfort. A little weird. So, what is it that predicts marital success? There you go. If your parents divorce, then you are more likely to as well. I mean, that's what it is. Okay. Age. Yeah, if people get married too young, they're much, much, much more likely to divorce. Length of courtship. Yeah, people that get married after 2 days tend not to stay married. Their personalities need to match each other. Need to have healthy communication before marriage in order to break down expectations. Stress, obviously, is a big part of it. But other areas of marital adjustment that can really make a relationship vulnerable. Expectations about how husbands or wives should behave, and this goes back to that traditional gender role thing. Yeah, there you go. Traditional gender roles used to be clear. And modern roles need to be negotiated, and this is problematic. This is actually pretty interesting. That in the recession, the Great Recession of 2009, what happened was there was a huge spike in unemployment, and the unemployment was actually a pretty targeted demographic. Tended to be males that were high school graduates that were in blue collar, let's say factory work or something like this. So they were making a good income, they were supporting their family, and all of a sudden this group of people were were out of work. And all of a sudden what we find is that you've got an entire generation of people there that define their very existence as a male as being the one that supports the family. Okay, because that's their traditional role. I mean, as the head of the family, or as rephrase that, as the man, you're supposed to take care of the family. And so all of a sudden, nowadays, it's like, it's not as, it's socially acceptable that the man stays home and the woman goes to work, isn't it? Right? Why not? Okay, well, who knows? Okay. Job satisfaction and involvement affects marital satisfaction. Yeah. If things aren't going well at work, it comes home. It always does. Okay. Yeah, there it is. Male breadwinner versus dual role. Um, Relationship between job satisfaction and marital satisfaction. And yeah, there's almost nothing showing that mom's working is harmful to child's development. However, I will put in my own little 2 cents on this. I believe that at least a couple of months mom should stay with an infant, and it's not a sexist thing. um, Biologically, that, I mean, evolutionarily, that's just who we are. And those first few months form the most important basis of all social development. And it feels that if you confuse the infant at that point, and I mean, all you got to do is study Erik Erikson's stages of social development, and you'll get a better understanding of this. But I truly believe that women should spend at least 2 months, if not 3 months, or maybe even six. But I think 3 months with very close contact with an infant, and should not go back to work if they can afford it. And see, that's where it comes down to here: financial difficulties. And so clearly, financial difficulties cause stress, and of course, interrupt communication, because who wants to talk about it? There's conflict in how money should be spent, and so it's a problem when there's financial difficulties. And anger, contempt, guess what else makes, by the way, vulnerable areas in marital adjustment? Children. I'll even leave that alone. Okay. So divorce rates. Well, it turns out divorce is on the rise, right? And of course we know that. Huge increase from the 50s and the 80s, and it's kind of settled down a little bit. In the 80s, the divorce rates were incredibly high. What happens is that when you ask people, when they first get married, what's the likelihood you're going to get divorced? And people are like, no, it isn't going to happen. Obviously, it does. But divorce is not evenly spread across all demographic groups. There's clearly some demographic groups that have far higher rates of divorce than others, and I mean that's clearly tied to, say, for example, financial difficulties. Certain demographics are more likely to have financial difficulties and therefore more likely to have divorce, etc. So we see there's these correlates with divorce, but clearly it's not the demographics in the divorce per se. But we find that in much more traditional context, collectivistic context in Asia, divorce is rising a lot. Okay, but you find that the traditional collectivistic views of Asia are eroding away, and more individualistic American values are creeping in. So divorce is not just an event, it's a process. It's not just a one-shot kind of a thing. Obviously, it's stressful for everybody, but divorce it does have pros and cons, and so if a couple is constantly arguing, there is definitely a pro to divorce, in that the children aren't exposed to such a toxic environment, for example. We find divorce is usually financially more difficult for women, usually. We find other gender factors, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Children. Well, long-term adjustment patterns don't seem to, and again, don't forget, this is correlation. So the majority of the time, there is not long-term adjustment problems. Okay. It does, of course, have some negative effects on children, often because of the finances, because you're taking the finances of two adults and splitting it into two different households. So clearly, there's less finances available once this occurs. Second marriages are less successful than first marriages, but only a little bit. So Step families can be a very difficult adjustment. However, it doesn't appear that children in step families are less well adjusted. Okay, so as a whole, how about other possible things? So we know that gay marriage has become a hot button topic. Okay, um, what do I don't even have it. Don't I have it? No, I don't have it. Okay, gay marriage has become a hot button topic, and it turns out that there's a lot of backlash against it. And a lot of people believe that children in gay marriages are going to just turn out to be crazy. Well, no, no, no. The children in gay marriage, whatever, the children of okay, whatever, have are no worse off in adjustment than any other child. So there's no evidence to support this terrible belief, but it's a scary thought because now I don't get the details, but it's just in the news coming down the pipeline is a child is adopted by a gay couple, right? And I'm sure a foreign adoption. And now all of a sudden the child is given citizenship, and now the U.S. government is trying to strip the citizenship from this child because they don't accept the marriage as legitimate. And I was like, wow, okay, this is I got to check the details on that one. It scares the heck out of me. Cohabitation, living together. About 70% of couples do it nowadays. It's very rare that people, do not live together before marriage. It's just a step. It doesn't seem to be related to marital success at all. It used to be, but now it's become so common it's not even there. And so all of a sudden, there's a lot more people that are remaining single. There's a lot less pressure. It's much more acceptable, and it's as we talked about already. In fact, I read a very interesting article in Korea because Korea also has a very declining population rate. And they were interviewing males that were in their early 20s. And they said, they're just not in relationships because they just can't afford to go out on a date. They just can't afford to take a. And their response to why they don't get into a relationship was, I can't afford it. It's just not even an option. And so clearly, if people view marriage as an unaffordable option, I don't know what happen. So what we find is that, what we see, intimate partner violence. Now, we find, obviously, that it's usually the male perpetrator, female victim, but it is not always that situation. It can occur in marriage, in cohabitation, in any kind of partnership. Clearly, this can involve the actual person that received or is the victim of the abuse, or even the children that witness and see this stuff. Because what we find, unfortunately, is that physical abusers are if somebody becomes a physical abuser, chances are their parent was also a physical abuser. So it is generational in this sense. There's really no single profile about who would become an abuser. Although there is some correlates that I don't want to set up stereotypes, but there are definitely some correlates here. And what we find is that often, again, the women will stay in the relationship because they can't afford to leave. All right, they can't. They don't have the money. They don't have enough resources on their own, or where are they going to live? All right, what place will they're afraid for themselves. But often they'll feel like they're being blamed. Like, what did you do wrong? Why is this happening to you? Related to intimate partner violence is date rape. Date rape is actually the most common form of. And so what you find is by far the majority of rapes occur with people that the victim knows. The victim knows the person, the perpetrator. Um, Date rape, and college campuses are getting on board with this. They're making some very clear rules about what equals consent for sexual interactions. and they're making it very, very explicit. And they've gone. I think some places actually, some universities actually have a contract that's written up that both parties signed before. But absolutely, that many schools have this policy that's like, okay, these are the words that must be spoken before we can assume consent has been given. Okay. We find that date rape is very difficult to measure simply because most date rape does not get reported. And I mean, I'm not terribly surprised, considered so many times that the victims are, in fact, you know, accused of causing the problems themselves. So, what I wanted to point out here, just as I saw at one point, I wish I remember where I saw this one. I would love to have a copy of it. But it asked a survey of college freshmen males, college freshman males, and they said, if you knew 100% you would not get caught, would you rape a woman? All right, it was put together a little bit better than that, but that was fundamentally the question. And it was shocking because like 50% of these freshmen said, yes, if you could guarantee I would not get caught, I would do it. And so it's a frightening thing out there that this is a reality that it's out there. I mean, hopefully, I want to think better things of the world, but when I see something like that, it doesn't shock me because I grew up in a college environment and I know them. I know those people. I've seen those people. I had to be roommates with some of those people. So clearly, this is something we need to be incredibly careful of. All right, so we're going to stop there, and y'all need to start studying for exam number 2. Okay? So I'll see you after the exam.